So welcome to It's Not All About the Numbers, the leadership podcast that doesn't just focus on the bottom line. Hi, my name is Chris, and that is Mike.
Hi, everyone.
And our co-host this week is Sarah Courtman, Senior Finance Manager, and also a very early adopter of the Gen CFO community. So thank you for joining us, Sarah.
Thanks for having me.
Brilliant. So we've had varied weeks, so let's just jump in with how your week's been. Mike, what have you been up to?
So this week has been a grunt week so far. So I've been going through loads of data sets, trying to get them onto a platform which involves reading metadata and looking at licenses, which is, it's entertaining, but can get a little dull, especially given that both of my sons, both of my sons have finished their exams yesterday and it's now hot. And they went to the beach yesterday, so I'm sat here at home doing that whilst they're down on the beach paddleboarding and enjoying the sunshine. So that's a bit disappointing. However, we are all off to Alton Towers tomorrow, so it should be roller coasters till the weekend. So, a mix of grunt work and leisure time. Should be a good week.
Sounds good. How was the F1 simulator? I remember that from last week.
That was excellent. I can't believe how many F1 simulators there are in the proximity of St Paul's Cathedral. There must be like 150 in this like bar thing. But it was brilliant. It was really good fun. The simulators were like full on motion, big screens all around you. And me and my two sons were playing each other and just trying to drive each other off the road, which was, just like F1.
Love it. Yeah, I had a go at those. I think Brooklands, I think the BMW place there, they're pretty special actually. not just an arcade game. Sarah, how about yourself?
Yeah, good work-wise. So a piece that I'm looking at is around like carbon pricing and carbon, like how you reduce to get to net zero, and had like a really interesting conversation with someone from a network that was sort of telling me all about how they do it and what they do. So I guess it was more of a information piece for me this week, other than obviously the usual month-end finance stuff. So that goes without saying. But quite looking forward to getting into like the minefield that is carbon emissions. And then personally, went out for some dumplings last night. Me and my friends have a tradition for each of our birthdays. We go get each other a piece of jewelry, and then we go for dumplings. So we did that last night. Missed a lot of the really boring football, which I was a bit worried about that, it was going to be this amazing game. Glad I didn't care in the end. And then I'm doing a fitness challenge with my netball club. So lots around how far I can run at the moment, which is sad.
That sounds brilliant. If you can have a fitness challenge and do dumplings, I think, you're living the life, really.
Yeah, I know, right?
Where'd you go for those? Is it Chinatown or somewhere?
No, there's a place just near Liverpool Street Station called Uncle Dumplings, or Three Uncles, one of those two. And it's really, really tiny. Like you can barely sit in it, but they're just really good. We found them because one of the girls looked at this TikTok. It was like the 5 best places to get dumplings in London. And the first time we did it, we went round to all of them. And that has been our favourite. So now we stay there every time.
I think that we've got a title for the podcast already.
Three dumplings.
I like it.
Yeah, I like that as well. Brilliant. Sounds fun. Happy birthday. Was it your birthday?
No, it's one of the other girls.
Oh, okay. Well, your time will come.
It will, yeah.
Love it. Well, my week on the work front, I was doing a bit of product development, talking about some of the things that we can change and planning for 2025, which is probably the earliest we started our planning, but we really need to do it now because we've got quite a lot of momentum with what we're doing. And on the personal front, to be honest, I was just recovering from the awards last week, which I've spoken about already. I think the last episode, my voice told it all, after saying to everyone, do not drink pink drinks. I think it took about 2 days to recover, which is pretty standard nowadays, but it was a good night and well worth it. But that's that's been me this week.
Can you imagine how Taylor Swift feels? I mean, you only performed for an hour, whereas she does like 3.5 hours every night.
Yeah, I'm more in the Billie Eilish camp. 90 minutes and that's it, right?
Yeah,
You don't need to sort of showboat.
leave them wanting more. Yeah, fair enough.
Exactly, and I hope I did. I hope I
Yeah.
did. It's for you to decide, right? It's for you to decide. But anyway, apart from that, there's been a lot happening this week, and we've seen, the world of politics is getting madder and madder. And there's been a lot of chat from business leaders about who they're supporting and why they're supporting. And this is not a political podcast. It is a leadership podcast. But it's been interesting how people have identified, business leaders as now supporting a particular party to almost justify why they should be in power. And I was just curious to sort of have a chat with you, Sarah, particularly about, being in small business and being in business, big business, right? Because you've done both.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe what small business can learn from large business and vice versa, because a lot of small businesses talk about being more agile, more lean. But is that actually true? What's your sort of experience being in both?
Yeah, so I guess in the experience for the small business, I mean, definitely lean. There were three of us, so I don't think you can get much more lean, and definitely agile because of that, which obviously has many, many positives. And, the red tape sort of is non-existent, which means that you get a lot more innovation. You can come up with ideas and see them through pretty quickly. I guess the flip side to that is that it's often quite difficult when you're always changing. So there's a real fine balance between trying to be agile enough and pivot to make sure that you're hitting customer demands so that you can make your business work. Changing too much means that you don't necessarily always have the same vision or structure. So then people don't quite know what you're about, and finding that balance is very, very difficult. Because if you change too much, you sort of lose people, like you were saying earlier with the momentum. Once you get a bit of momentum, you really need to focus on what you're good at and not just go after everything you think the customer wants, because you can't do everything. You don't have the money to do everything, and you don't have the resources to do everything. And actually fine tuning what you're good at is super important. Otherwise, it becomes very difficult.
So something I'm really, really curious about in the really small business, I've got my own company, which is micro small, which is just me and my wife. well, me and my wife. I couldn't do it without her for sure. But yeah, me basically doing the outside work. And what I find is that I have lots of ideas, but sometimes there's difficulty doing the complete to finish a bit.
Yeah.
And I just wondered, is that the same in the kind of business that you're describing? When there was just the three of you, are you constantly moving on to the new things and do you find it difficult? Because there's no one to delegate to, right? There's no one to say, could you just do this?
Yeah, and I think often if you are starting up your own business, this is going to be a very big stereotype, but you tend to be quite creative because you've got the idea that you think sort of no one else has got, and you have like the vision. What's very hard for the people that aren't the sort of founders, so the people like me who come in to, I guess, try and bring the structure, is reining them in, but not like ruining their innovation, because they tend to have all these ideas that they want to do and want to try. And it's very difficult to get them to hone it in. Like, you definitely can just go off and do everything, but it's one of those like master of nothing, but I can't remember what the full phrase is.
Jack of all, master of none.
Yeah, exactly. And when you're starting a business, you need to be a master, because you have to break a market, or you have to be seen to delivering something that no one else can. And if you're not a master, you're probably not going to make it. So finding that bit, like, letting the innovation go, but then trying to hone them in and get them to realize that this is sort of the best way forward, is hard.
That's such a great observation, though, because I've worked with quite a few people in startup phase, and actually every phase of growth, to be honest, from micro through to enterprise. And it's It really is a struggle because you're right. This the CEO, the founder tends to be very creative, has the idea, and actually is full of ideas. And and this sounds really trite, but the ideas are the easy bit, right? Everyone comes up with a business idea. Yeah, it's actually staying in the race, and working out what works and keeping on doing it and iterating, which actually is the sort of more structured, boring bit probably to a founder. And that's why actually that, a lot of founder CEOs do actually hand over at some point to an MD or, a chairman, because they're just like, you know what, I've taken it so far. I now realize that there's a different phase of growth for this company. But it's really hard for the first people to come in to create that structure. And at Mike, I know in the past we've talked about, agile. It's like some people see agile as, no rules kind of approach to doing work. And it's not. You are standardizing, you're simplifying, there is documentation involved, right? That's just the boring stuff, right? that maybe not every founder appreciates.
Just sort of building on that, though. So I think that what you're describing is the need to do repeatable things. And the only way you can do things in a repeatable way is to have them documented and written down. So you move from that kind of idea into a repeatable process, which is the product that you're selling, be it a thing or a service. And I think that transition is what you're describing. I'm really curious actually how, because I know you've moved from that environment, Sarah, into more corporate. What learnings have you taken from that kind of like almost order on chaos into an organization which is clearly going to be a bit more structured and, I was going to say the word bureaucratic, that sounds negative, but you know what I mean? It's going to have a bureaucracy about it that's not there.
Yeah, I think it's interesting. I've actually had a lot of, I said, personal growth for this is probably more because they were so different, right? Like for the startup, they had nothing, like no finance. And, I also came from quite a big company that had, everything set up. And so, setting us up for VAT and setting us up for payroll, stuff I'd never done. So apart from, I guess, learning it in my studies probably like 15 years ago. So it wasn't necessarily the professional stuff I learned, but I learned what I actually really enjoy and what I get, I guess, energy from. And I definitely am more suited to a bigger organization. I love the sort of team spirit, the camaraderie, and I quite like rules and processes, it turns out. Like I quite like having a bit of a direction and then being given the sort of free rein to build on it. Starting from scratch, I feel like there's a lot of pressure on that. And when there are so few of you, any decision you make or break it. And that is quite stressful. I mean, like in hindsight, when I came into the small business, so I don't know if anyone knows what I was doing, but it was going to be an online casino. And that, like, we all came from the gambling industry. We know how much, they can make and, how to sort of do it well. But actually, when I came in to make a casino, you really need quite a lot of money because it's all about marketing. And they were running out of money, which I knew when we joined. But they'd built an amazing back office platform. And when you think about a lot of what Genesee on is tech, our tech was amazing. A lot of the big companies had really old, outdated systems. Everything was manual. Everything had workarounds. They'd built something from scratch that could do everything any other one could do and better and quicker. And I was like, I think you've got your model wrong. Why are you going into a casino? Why are you not selling this as a B2B platform? Because that's where the market is. Everyone's going to need to, in the next few years, change their platform because they're all outdated. And so they did a massive pivot, basically completely fundamentally changed their model, which was down to me sort of showing them the numbers, saying that this wasn't going to work if you were going to continue the casino. And yeah, I mean, we went through a dicey bit where we weren't going to make it and it's still going. I think they're now going to, it's now going to actually take off. They've got a few big clients and it's going to work. Wow.
You're the you're the guy in the McDonald's story. He turned around to the founder and he said, "You don't realize what business you're in," and he basically pivoted the whole fast food sort of retail side to estate agency and investing in property. And
if I get as big as McDonald's, I'll take it.
He was, but he was a finance guy, right? He was showing them the numbers, he was showing them the opportunity, he was showing them the costs and where the opportunities were, which I I think is really, really cool, actually. Um, and that's the sort of influence that finance people have, right? I just wondered whether you'd have that perspective if you hadn't have been in a larger business, and only in startup. Or does it really help to have a bit of both? Should everyone do a bit of stint in startup and a bit of a stint in enterprise?
Yes, like without a doubt. One, you learn how you work best, and I have now learned that. But two, you learn from both. Like you learn the positives of what like a big organization do and why it's slow, and actually how you can like try and change that by being in a small place. So having sort of small subsections. And also I think agile is an interesting word, because if you use agile in the right way, it is amazing in whatever format you're doing. People just don't use the word right. And people just use it as we want to just try and do things quickly. And like that, it's not the right term of what people use it for. And you can learn a lot from a small business in how if they do agile correctly, of like, getting those processes in so that you can make decisions quicker, so that you can pivot if you need to, and you can build on what you're doing. It's just a big business has the money behind it. And that's the bit that is always a struggle. Like, I don't feel like you ever really find out what you're made of until you've gone into a business that you don't think will still have enough money for the next month. It's a very character defining moment.
So I recognize what you're saying about getting that experience. I'm hearing something slightly different, which is around being open-minded. So it's almost what you're describing is when you go into a startup mode, you've got to be open-minded to what the possibilities are and what's actually happening. You used the McDonald's example, Chris, but I know there's another one with Starbucks, whereas, everybody thinks Starbucks is a coffee company, but actually now it's a finance company, because it basically supports the franchises with loans and investments and stuff like that. So it's much more finance than being open-minded in a big business to what your business model is and what you can and can't do, I think is what you're actually describing.
And basically being able to articulate that. Because I think in the startup world, the CEO or, managing director, whoever they are, they have a vision of what they want their company to be. And actually, like the biggest challenge for me originally was to convince them that actually what they had built wasn't what they'd built. They'd built something great, but it wasn't what they thought it was, and it wasn't how they were going to make money. And convincing them of that, because they had this sort of, idea in their head, is hard. Sort of crushing someone's dreams a little bit.
How did you do that though? Because I can't remember that it was on this podcast or I was listening to another podcast, but someone was saying that, Richard Branson, like founder of Virgin.
That wasn't this podcast.
It wasn't. Okay. It wasn't that highbrow. Apparently he famously didn't ever really understand the finances, the numbers side of things. He was dyslexic and he would always need to have like a bit of a side chat about the numbers. And, as I understand it, like the finance team would always take him aside and almost sort of, talk about the numbers in pictures in a different way, right? Everyone's going on about finance needing to be a storyteller nowadays. And there was this anecdote about, the sort of revenue is the sea around, your island, but you only own the island. That's your profit, and it was sort of like those sorts of conversations that actually helped him understand and sort of make decisions. So, but how did you go about that? Because, it's hard leaning into a founder who's sort of owns everything and can also make decisions about your career, right?
Yeah, so I knew them before, so we were like friends. So, you can be a bit more, cut to the chase with them, I think. Ultimately, they'd been going for a couple of years and didn't really have many customers and couldn't really work out why. Yet we had people coming to us asking to basically rent the platform, right? Like we were doing no marketing in one way and getting customers, and doing lots another way and getting nothing. And that sort of black and white, this is where your sales are actually coming from with very little effort and money, quite easy to show, I guess. Like, when you have no sales one side, there's not a lot they can actually, contradict.
Yeah, no, that's really interesting. That kind of, I mean, listening to what Chris was saying and the explanation, but also that kind of like how you engage with it. I think that there's definitely something in there around communication of a particular message in a way that lands with your audience. Two things really, which is one, I think that there's something there about how we talk about finance in general. So to people, and getting people interested in, like, well, not even just finance, business, whatever it is you want to get people interested in, using multiple communication methods and approaches to actually get the message across of why different things are important. It leads me on to another question for you, Sarah, which is kind of almost like right back to the start, is why did you get into finance in the first place? How did you end up doing what you're doing right now?
I always think this is really sad. So when I was 7, I was good at maths. I was better than a normal kid, so I could count to 10 quicker, I guess is sort of the answer. And the only job I knew that you did when you were good at maths was an accountant. So I said when I was 7, I was going to be an accountant. Then when I got to about 14, I spoke to a friend of the family who was an accountant and said, don't do that at university. You'll never, it's basically pointless because you don't learn anything else. You'll still have to train after. So I didn't. Then I did law. And then when I finished, I still liked numbers. Like, I think nowadays, like, I was actually talking to someone about this at the awards, Chris, that, isn't it interesting nowadays where you just have no concept of the jobs that exist? Like now, if someone was good at maths, like you could go into a million different jobs. But I would say back in the day, I mean, I'm not that old, but I'm old enough that I can sort of use that phrase in this sense. If I was from quite a small town, and if numbers was your thing, you went to accountancy. If English was your thing, you became a teacher. Like there was very black and white things that you ended up going into. And like even now, I think it's so hard for people to navigate what jobs to go into, because finance, I actually don't see myself as a traditional finance person. Like I've never had necessarily the ambition to be a CFO as a type of person. I just like people, and I like the influencing part, which I think is why I actually not struggled with the startup, but like why I got less energy. I like the influencing part, which I did, but the actual sitting down, crunching the numbers day in, day out isn't what I like. I like explaining it to people, making them make the good decisions, making the strategy, the like forefront. And so I don't always think that that's just a finance role. I'm interested in however that looks and helping. And so, yeah, that can actually nowadays be any job, because, finance really should go across the board, and however you fit that into your business is always only ever going to be a benefit.
Yeah, I love that. And I obviously you're part of our community, and that defines you a little bit as well. I think that's brilliant. I didn't know that about you though. I didn't realize that you started in law and then went across. I was quite similar actually. I had my dad was a CFO, and I remember being at primary school kind of thinking, I want that corner office and I want to be a businessman. Yeah. And, those things do weirdly just define you, don't they? But on your point around, job titles and jobs that we don't even know exist. Like I remember when, not that long ago, maybe 5 years ago, I was sort of saying, I was talking about XP&A instead of FP&A, and sort of bringing in more data and analytics and all this good stuff. And people were like, what are you talking about? Now it's like you have a head of analytics in finance reporting to the CFO or finance director. Everyone's trying to use more data. Obviously I was an early adopter and a bit of a thought leader on it, but it's so true. There are so many jobs out there now that have been created that you've got to keep an open mind, which is why sticking to traditional career paths, I think, is just one out of many, many, many different approaches. And Mike and I have said this a lot on the podcast. It's the people who have actually kind of bounced down the corridor of their career who seem to have so much more to offer, in terms of leadership and business, right?
Yeah, and I think some people need the structure, right, and need to know what they're aiming for, and like if that works for them, great. It's just never been something that I liked. I don't know how else to describe it. My brother's actually a finance recruiter, which is hilarious. And And when I took my first job, so I actually started in a charity, and I went from practice into being a finance business partner. I sort of skipped the like traditional bit of like either doing group accounting or the sort of bit that most people do. And I remember him saying, don't take that job. It'll be the worst mistake you ever make, because, you know, once you get pigeonholed into like a charity or something, it's really hard to get out. And all I knew was I didn't want to do the traditional job. I'd heard of this job as a finance business partner that was all about talking to people and helping people analyze their numbers, which is all I knew I wanted to do at the time. Like, that's what I was good at and what I enjoyed. I ignored him. And, you know, I have found my path out, and I found my path to lots of other different areas. But, you know, for some people, that is how it works. I just don't necessarily agree it was for me.
I recognize that, because I've got the question that's in my head to ask you, which is, what do you think 7-year-old Sarah would look at now as a role? And in my head, I'm thinking you're going to say something like a coder, or you know, I'm going to work in games or making computer games or something. Do you know what I mean? It's a mathematical thing.
Head of TikTok.
I don't even have TikTok or Instagram, so I would be useless at that. Yeah, do you know, I do think about that quite a lot, actually. Like, what would I tell my younger self to go into? And I'm also like a local school governor, and I do like a lot of the like careers stuff days, and like where you try and get like girls into like different areas and stuff. And I often think about like what to say, and it obviously depends on what you're good at. But when you're so susceptible at a young age, I know from me, like one conversation put me on one path, and it's like quite a responsibility to not say the wrong thing. I always say that if you definitely want a job for life, go into tech and go into coding. That's right.
That's interesting. I thought, you know, Chris with your corner office, and Sarah, you with the accountancy. My dad was a policeman. The one thing I knew for a fact was that was not my path. I knew that very, very quickly. I am not doing that. So no, that's really interesting. And I do think you're right, because I think about like my career path, and I went to a school where, you know, hardly anybody went to university at the point that I went to school. Yes, so actually going to university was success. And I've got a friend who I went to school with who's a successful barrister now. And I say to him, you know, meet up, and I say, well, how the hell did you end up doing that? I didn't even know a barrister was a thing. And the answer was, somebody in his family knew somebody that was a barrister. Yeah. And that was the only reason that he knew that the thing existed. To me, it was like, I didn't even know that law was a thing. And now I do.
Oh, yeah. I actually did law because knew I wasn't going to do accountancy because this one person said this one thing when I was 14. I was going to do business studies and ICT because that's what I was good at sixth form. And my form tutor actually was the business and IT head. And he said, everyone who doesn't know what they want to do at the moment is doing business. If you want to set yourself apart, do something different and a bit harder. And I was like, okay, like what? Like law? And he was like, yeah, like law. And I was like, okay. And then I just signed up like the next day. Like no thought process went into it whatsoever, apart from him saying that that'd be a better thing to do.
Such a sliding doors moment, right? You're basically, your life is a series of sliding doors moments.
Random people that have said things that I've listened to, you know, I'm sure in 10 years' time we'll see if that's right or wrong, but it's not gone too bad so far. So
gone very well from what we can see. And it's great to have you on the podcast. Talking of learning, I've just got one question before we go on, but talking of learning and, you know, education, like obviously you're part of our world. And I just wanted to take the opportunity to ask you about peer learning and the value of peer learning, because, you know, Mike and I go on about this all the time, but what's your what do you get out of peer learning when you come together with sort of a group of like-minded people?
I mean, I love it. That is an understatement. Like even this week because part of this new role is a lot about stuff that I've never done. The whole reason I wanted to take this job was because I wanted to learn something new, and you know, all around like carbon emissions and the carbon reporting, and like speaking to a group of people that you've never spoken to with different ideas and different thoughts that you have never thought about is amazing. And I actually got into Gen CFO because of Usha, so women I used to work with, who was really big on, you know, making sure you learn from each other, trying to make sure that you have the right network to, you know, either look at other jobs or find out what's going on in like the world. And, you know, she's always been really big into that world. And I don't think I'll have made the jumps that I would have made without that like community. Like, you know, when I was going to take the startup job, I nearly didn't take it because I was scared. And, you know, the people around that were like, we will help you. Like, because I was very open about the fact that, you know, I hadn't done, you know, the basic technical accounting for years. I've been a business partner for a long time. And, you know, that maybe, you know, my VAT, my tax skills were probably something to not be desired. And everyone I spoke to in my community, some Gen CFO people, some in my workspace, all said, you can call me whenever you need and we will help you. Like whatever you can't do, we can between us. And it's the only reason I took the job.
Wow. That's amazing. I did not know that. That's amazing to hear. And, you know, on so many levels,
I actually
right?
turned the job down 3 times. I said no 3 times because I was so scared.
Wow. And, you know, it didn't work out, but it was, you know, a huge learning, and I think we're all agreed that it was, you know, part of building a successful career, other failures as well as the successes. But no, it's really good to hear because, you know, we facilitate a lot of these conversations and we try to bring the right people together, but it's impossible to kind of get around everyone to, you know, understand the connections that are forming or people's contribution after the hour that you're kind of facilitating. So it's great to hear.
But you did quite a lot at the start. You said I was the early adopter, but we started talking, remember when I took the transformation job and had no experience in how to do a transformation, and you took the time out of your schedule at the time to go through what was some like the good points of transformation, where you'll struggle, what you really need. And like, you know, I often used whatever insights you gave me into the meetings with the CFO to say, look, this isn't going to work because we haven't got enough resource or we're not committing enough time, because you had said what had been your failings. Like, you know, you're a big part of that too.
I'll take that.
Yeah,
you made my day.
You should take that. There's something I find fascinating about the peer learning, and actually, Chris, you and I have spoken about like the open space kind of things as well, such as the lean coffee that we sometimes do. And I think for me, what it is, it's about creating the space for people to talk to each other. And actually, I think everybody that gets involved will have a different experience. You might get something similar, but you kind of have the ability within a community and within that peer learning environment to shape it to suit yourself. And I think that for me is the power of it. And when I see people come together and working together in that environment, it's the links that you don't expect that are the things that are the magic. So, you know, the conversation you just described that having with Chris with that transformation job, it was probably another sliding doors moment, right? It happened, but you got so much out of it. And I think that for me, that's the power of the peer learning, is creating the space for the conversations that might happen by accident. So it's almost like intentional, accidental conversations.
Yeah, I've had a lot of those. Turns out, didn't realise until I had this chat.
Love it. Well, look, it's at this point that we tend to ask a question, and we're going to take it back up a level a bit with this question. But if you do have any questions, do let us know. It's podcast@generationcfo.com, who produced this, or simply reach out to Mike and myself, probably via LinkedIn. The question this week, so I was having a conversation with a new job title, Head of Analytics at Jaguar Land Rover, right? And she made a really interesting comment about the word transformation and the fact that it sounds temporary and it's almost problematic. And I've always felt this, right? It's almost like, you know, you transform and then it's done. So her question was, you know, should the goal be business excellence rather than digital transformation?
Yeah, I actually agree with that. And I also think there's often, and it's not always the case, but often a negative connotation to transformation, because the individuals see that as changing their job, which people find scary, and often leads to, you know, not a reorging, but like ultimately you need to get the right people into the right jobs and make sure that everything is working in the right way. And, you know, a lot of companies misuse the word and say transformation when they're making massive redundancies. So there's a negative connotation to it. It's a bit like agile when people don't use the word right. And so actually, I think the damage has been done for the word. And I think, it needs a rebrand.
So I think that there's something bigger than that as well. I think it's talking about processes rather than outcomes. So digital transformation is a process. Agile is a process. I've worked in open data for a long time. Open data is a license. It's a process. And actually the outcome is something else. So business excellence might be the outcome, but it also might be efficiency, or it might be, in the case of open data, it's more data being shared and used. So I think that actually quite a lot of the things that we talk about focus on the process. Actually, head of analytics is a really good example. Analytics is a process. So I think there's just something in there about how we communicate the difference between how we do something and what it is we're trying to achieve.
Yeah, and also I think ultimately we've needed transformations because a lot of companies have, guess, not done the changes they've gone along, and you sort of need that big change to get back up to scratch. And actually, if companies were a bit better at the iterative, like continuous learning and continuously small improvements, you wouldn't need that sort of big bang a lot of the time. And I think a lot of companies, because of COVID, have had to do a sort of big bang type change. Either they've had to pivot or they've had to, fundamentally change their model. They probably do need a big bang, but going forward, ideally, won't have another COVID or something, or war, or, anything else that wants to ruin the economy. And we can just go to trying to be a leader and making it normal for people to want to not just do their job, but make it better. I think there's something around making everyone think that their job is not just doing their job, but it's to do what they were doing and to do it better going forward.
So I agree with that in terms of me as an individual working in an organization. However, just that kind of contrast between a startup and a big business, I think that quite a lot of the digital transformation that we see as big projects is in a bigger organization. And in part, that's because the processes and structures have been put in place and you have to follow the rules. So here is a rule to follow. And if you see a rule that's not working properly, doesn't matter. You've still got to follow the rule. And the transformation is re-looking at the rules, and you have to do that. You get to a critical point where then you have to do it. And I think that that's what we're seeing as digital transformation in bigger organizations. And I think that, so whilst I completely agree with the premise of what you said, that we should be doing incremental change as we go, I think in bigger organizations, that's harder because of how they set up.
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, it gets to a point where, the tech debt's too big in a lot of companies and they have to do something about that.
Yeah,
that costs a lot of money.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that question. I think the other part of this is just, in simple terms, focusing on business value rather than the change itself, right? And
exactly.
It's not doing things, because the new tech's popped up, we've now got Gen AI to add to everything, right? It's like, what value are you trying to bring here? And until it's proved, then, maybe we shouldn't be so hasty. But I love it. I love it. It sort of turns that whole world of transformation on its head a little bit.
I mean, in simplistic terms, just to really summarize that, in simplistic terms, it's not focusing on the what and really understanding the why. And it's just starting to drive in why, and just asking that question, I think will really help in this space.
Yeah, absolutely. Good stuff. So I'm conscious of time, as ever, pushing the agenda. So on to good data, bad data. So what do we have here? I don't know whether I want to read this.
It's something I found from friend Giuseppe again, which there are lots of elections going on in the world at the moment. There's one that I'm not allowed to talk about because of my other project, but I am allowed to talk about the US presidential election. And this data it's good data because it's really interesting. But it does lead on to the next question in a minute. So it's a company called 538 who have basically done a whole heap of modeling using polling, economic, demographic data to look at the likely election outcomes in the US. And basically, they've run this model 100 times, and Biden wins 50 times out of 100, and Trump wins 49 times out of 100. And I just think that is just scary. Really good, interesting data, but a little bit scary that it's that close when the models are run. So it's going to be interesting.
Yeah. I think we all feel the same about that one.
Got a lot to say about that, but another day.
What I struggle with, even with those two, is just believing in such a senior leader, and I mean really senior,
It's not all about the numbers.
it's no age is nothing
No
but a
numbers
number.
there.
Age is nothing but a number. But yeah, maybe reading the auto cue, well is just a starting point. But anyway, yeah, interesting stuff, and leads us on to bad data.
So based on what I just went through there on good data, because that is clearly interesting and useful data, I almost had a question: what is bad data? Because actually, what I've just said is it's good data, but it's a bad story. And actually, I think quite a lot of the times that when we do this, we're talking about bad stories illustrated with data rather than where data has been rubbish. So yeah, I just wanted to ask you guys the question: what do you think bad data is?
Well, if it's not trustworthy, I think like every company has had problems with a single source of truth. You ask for a headcount report from HR or a headcount report from someone else, and that like they don't match, and then the amount of time and effort you have to go to reconcile stuff is always. I don't think I've ever come to a company where that was easy, apart from when there were three of us, and it was very easy because there was nothing there. But yeah, you have to believe in it. You have to know that if you're making decisions on it, that the data is true. That's definitely
that headcount one's intriguing, right? So at the end of the month, an organisation pays a bunch of people. Surely they should know how many people.
And to be fair, there are many reasons that they're not the same. But like then coming to what you want to show as a business, that's actually quite a good example, actually, because do you want to show like the bums on seats, physical people you've paid, or do you want to show what your structure is? Because I started this role as a maternity cover, and at one point there were two of us. Now that's not probably a true reflection of the size of the business if you've got crossovers in 100 roles. Sure. But if you want to show how big you are as a company, as a like structural base, then you would go a different number. Like there's a lot of reasons for it. And like maternity covers, like do they count on your numbers or not? And
so that's another question, which is there really ever a single source of the truth?
Oh, well, right? Yeah, true,
That's another
one of the questions is we're changing our ERP, and someone had a question for me of we've got a headcount number in the report, and we've got headcount numbers that we report internally, and they're different, and why? And we can they be the same? And the answer was no, because they're used for different reasons. So internally we use it as a structure, and externally we have to use it for like another reason. And no.
Yeah. And it's right. I think people see differences and they're like, which one's right? But it's like they're both right. It's just different audiences or different perspectives.
But that's when you have to have the materiality override, right? Like, is it fundamentally going to change your decision-making process? Have you got the right data to make the right decisions?
Absolutely. That's it at the end of the day. Stop arguing about the data and, what's the decision you're trying to make? Focus on the decision, and does it matter? Like, or is it just a sort of, when it comes down to people's commission, and fine. But if it's, if it's do we bring on extra people or not, there might be a case to get into the detail. But I think generally just focus on the decision rather than the data. But to your point about what is bad data, I think. If you're making decisions on bad data, so have you got the data management right? Have you got the foundations right? Is it structured right? Is it sort of repeatable? Those sorts of things. I think that is bad data in an organization. But for this podcast, Mike, I actually am starting to think this is more like good data, bad news.
Yes, that's exactly that. Yeah.
Because everything's good data.
Bad reasons.
Yeah, exactly.
I think what you just said there. So I agree with the good data, bad news. The bit on the what is bad data. I think for me, there's a thing in there about you've just got to understand it. As long as you understand what the data is that you're talking about, because actually the headcount illustration's a brilliant one. Both bits of data are good data as long as you understand what the bits of data should be used for and shouldn't be used for. And I think that for me is exactly right. That for me is the bottom line. And so, yeah.
Excellent. Well, look, that's our time. I really appreciate you coming on today, Sarah. If if people want to join you in the community or they want to contact you, what's the best way to connect?
Yeah, LinkedIn's fine. I'm on it a lot, so. come there.
Yeah, excellent, excellent. Well, thanks for that. I think my takeaways are having a dream at primary school is perfectly fine. Also, doing a stint in startup and enterprise seems to be very character building.
Yes.
And yeah.
And we ought to be getting commission from LinkedIn, clearly, given that that's the way that everybody's linking with us.
See, it's your side hustle.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I will definitely talk to you about that. Sounds like you could help me out there. But look, that was fantastic. I really appreciate the chat today. So thank you, Sarah. Thank you from me. And thank you, Mike.
Thanks, everyone.
Cheers.
And remember, it's not all about the numbers.